All right, so then we're going to just continue with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. I gave you yesterday the history of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, somewhat of it. You know, the word history is really short for his story. This was his history, his story. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says the Mishnah continues. That's Mishnah Yud, right? That's Perek Beis Mishnah Yud and Pirkei Avos. I'd mentioned yesterday that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, when he used to give a drasha, there were thousands of people used to come and listen to him. But the Mishnah says something very interesting. The Mishnah says, Chamisha Talmidim hayu lo leRabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 Talmidim. So now, after I just told you that he had thousands of people listening to his Torahs, and his drashas, and his yeshiva, what is he saying? That he had 5 Talmidim, only 5. So if we look at the medaktik in the words of the Mishnah, if we're careful with the way the Mishnah words it, it says Chamisha Talmidim hayu loy. It should have just said Chamisha Talmidim hayu leRabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, but he adds the word loy to him. Yet, so first you want to explain. It's true he had thousands of Talmidim, but these Talmidim were so outstanding that they stood out amongst the thousands of his Talmidim. And not only that, they were such a nivus there. They were so humble that most people didn't recognize their greatness. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai felt it was very important to single them out, so people should see who is a great Talmid Chacham, who you can learn from. So he singles out these 5 because these were the Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which were most likely the highest level of his Talmidim. That is one shot in that. Another idea could be, years ago, when I was growing up, you ask somebody, where did you learn? Where do you learn? So the fellow would answer most likely, oh, I'm a Talmud of Reb Baron. I'm a Talmud of Reb Moshe, of Reb Chaim Guzovsky. He had many different, he would never say, today there's you ask somebody where you're learning, and you would say, oh, I'm in the Mir, I'm in Lakewood, I'm in this yeshiva, in Shabin, in Panovich. The difference was that these 5 Talmidim lived and breathed their Rebbe. In previous generations, those people who grew up and became so close to Reb Aaron Kotler, to Reb Moshe Feinstein, they quote him at every turn of their life. This is what he did, this is what he said. They lived and breathed their Rebbe. And these 5 Talmidim were so close and felt so in sync with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that they were exceptional Talmidim, and they lived and breathed Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So now we'll get into the 5 Talmidim. First, the Mishnah lists the 5 Talmidim, this Mishnah and the Mishnah Yud. First one is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. I'll just list the names first. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yossi HaKoyen, Rabbi Shimon ben Nisanel, who is also a Kohen, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. I'm going to first start with Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus. And even though the other ones, for example, Rabbi Yossi HaKoyen and Rabbi Shimon ben Nisanel, are basically unknown in Shas. Rabbi Yossi HaKoyen, I think there's one thing that he says in all of Shas. And Reb Shimon ben Nisanel, I don't think there's even one quoted thing of Reb Shimon ben Nisanel other than what Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai said, the shvach, the accolades that they deserved. But he begins with Reb Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Reb Eliezer ben Hyrcanus has an interesting history and story. He was the son of Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus was a very wealthy Jew that lived outside of Yerushalayim. But Hyrcanus he was a farmer. He had many fields, large fields, and he was wealthy from that. He had 5 or 6 sons. I think he had 6 sons. And he had given each one of them a field to cultivate and to plant and to work with. And Rebbe Eliezer was at that time about 22 years old. And one day his father, and happens to be the field that his father gave him was full of rocks and stones, which was much more difficult to plow. And he finds Rebbe Eliezer on the field sitting on a stone and he's crying. So he asks him, why are you crying? Did I give you a field that maybe we should switch with another brother? I'll give you another field. He says, no. He says, why are you crying? He says, I'm crying because I'm a farmer and I don't want to be a farmer. I want to learn Torah. He had a desire to learn Torah. So his father tells him, we are farmers. Our parents were farmers. This is our life. This is our tafkid. This earth. He says, I'm not happy with that. He says, I want to learn Torah. And he and his father didn't agree. And he took off. One day, he's not home anymore. He left his family and he went to Yerushalayim and he went to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to the yeshiva. He came there. He had absolutely nothing with him. He came only with his clothing. He gets to Yerushalayim and he sits into the yeshiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, what are you doing here? And he says, I came to learn Torah. And he says, fine. He's a young man coming to learn Torah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai goes over to him 2 or 3 days later. He sees that he's sitting there and steiging away and he's learning and he's very diligent. And he picked up very quickly things that somebody who had learned very, very little. He knew how to read. He knew the minimal amount of what a Jew should know, but he didn't know Torah. And certainly not in the level of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he saw he was picking it up pretty quickly. And 2 or 3 or 4 days later only, he saw there was something there. And he noticed that Rebbe Eliezer, there was an odor coming from his mouth. So he asked him, did you eat today? So he didn't answer him. And then he asked him again. So he says, yeah, I ate and he basically pumped it away his way out of it. So Rebbe Eliezer realized that he was fasting. He had noticed, he says, why are you fasting? He says, well, I don't really have money for food. So Rebbe Eliezer realized that this fellow was so dedicated to wanting to become a Talmud Chacham or just to know Torah, that he was willing to fast literally he just drank water. And you can drink water for a number of days and not eat. But obviously the stomach needs the food, and it was something was giving some sort of an odor. And he brought him into his house, he fed him, and he took care of him. And he became a very close Talmud of Yochanan ben Zakkai. So the story ends, interestingly enough, that Hyrcanus, his sons, were very upset at the younger brother. This lazy boy, he's going to inherit still from our father money. We have to sit and till the lands. They convinced the father to disown him, but he had to put it on paper. So he went to Yerushalayim to the Rabbanan, and just happened to come when there was a Sudas mitzvah, something, a siyum on something that was taking place, and all the chashuva people of Yerushalayim were there. There were many wealthy people that were there. And the Gemara actually lists the names of the wealthy people. And amongst them, all of a sudden, they notice Hyrcanus is there. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai recognized who he was. He knew he was the father of Rebbe Eliezer. And he told Rebbe Eliezer, could you please say Divrei Torah? And Eliezer says, I'm only here a short while. There's somebody I'm still sponging, so to speak. I'm still learning. I don't really have the power yet to give out Divrei Torah. He says, I think you do. And he said, I want you to start speaking Divrei Torah. And Rebbe Eliezer ben Hyrcanus started to speak Divrei Torah with such wondrous, unbelievable Divrei Torah that everybody was there. Kalba Savua was there. All these wealthy Yerushalmi people. This was at the time of right before the Charbon, were all there. And he says, Hyrcanus stands up in front of everybody. He says, I came here to disown my son because my son wanted to learn Torah, and I said no, and my other sons said he was a lazy kid, he really didn't want to work. But I see in order to become so quickly somebody that is able to give such a drasha, I want to reverse what I had in mind, and I want to give this son my whole inheritance, and my other sons to leave out of it. So Rebbe Eliezer stood up again and he told his father, I appreciate what you want to do, but I didn't come here to become wealthy, to learn Torah for the money. I came here to learn Torah for Torah's sake. So he read Lamamish Lishma. He said, I don't want any of the money. Give it to the other brothers. And that's how he lived his life. So I'm just going to give you, then we'll go to Mishnah Yud Aleph because it's a major connection. He just starts to explain from these 5 people. And I'm going to say, start with the Eliezer ben Hyrcanus as he does in the Mishnah. Hu ha'yomer, hu ha'yomoyne shvachim. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to sing praises. They used to enumerate all these praises to all of these 5 people, 5 Gedolim. And what did he say about Rebbe Eliezer ben Hurkenes? Rebbe Eliezer ben Hurkenes is bar sud she'ena ma'abed tipa. He has the capacity to hear something and learn something, just like you put water in a pit. In order to not to lose a drop of water, what they used to do is they used to line the pit with sid, which is lime. And that prevented the water, not one drop of water should go out, because don't forget, in Yerushalayim, it only rains in the winter. So the whole summer, they used to build these cisterns, these wells, these places to hold water. And this water, we had to take them through the whole summer. So they lined it with lime, with sid, so that it shouldn't absorb the water and go into the ground, but rather it keeps the water actually cool. Plus, it doesn't, you don't lose a drop. So he compared Rebbe Eliezer ben Hurkenes to a bar sid, a bar that's made out of cement and lined with lime, so that not even a drop of water a drop of mayim el Torah. Don't forget, we compare water to Torah. So Rebbe Eliezer ben Hurkenes never forgot anything that he learned. Now you would think it was because he had a photographic memory. He was some people. I had a guy in my class that you told him a number, he was able to say it backwards in a second. These are talents that Rebbe Nishon gave him. No, but he not to be a Eliezer ben Hurkenes. He loved learning so much. Somebody once went to one of the Ger Rebbes and said, I have a problem with memory. I learn and I forget. So he tells this chassid of his. He says, let me ask you a question. He says, did you ever forget to eat with a fork and put it in your mouth? In other words, do you ever forget where your mouth is? Do you ever forget to take a fork and stick it into your food? He says, why didn't you forget this? He says, because you love your food. If you love your food, you're never going to forget to take a fork, eat the food, and you know where your mouth is and put it in your mouth. He says, if you would love Torah as much as you love your food, then you would understand that you would repeat it over and over and over again until you remember everything. Ram Shik, he lived in about 150 years ago. He became a saganoi. Saganoi means he lost his eyesight in his later years, and he had a yeshiva, and he used to give a shir sightless. And yet, one morning, he had a Pshol Brach. He had somebody who took care of him. His name was Pshol Brach, somebody who became a big Rav later. And he said, he started to cry. Why are you crying, Rebbe? So he said, I'm crying because had I known that in my later years I wouldn't be able to see, he says, I would have not learned as much. I would have just chazered and repeated and reviewed as told it's so in my memory. And this is somebody who was able to give a shir sightless. And the story of Rebbe Kiva Eger once was visiting somebody, and he asked, does he have one of these firm on the Gemara, Rashba, and he says they said the owner of the house brings him one, and he says yes for a pen and a paper, and the next morning somebody looks into the safe and he sees that in this safer there was missing a page. And Reb Kiva Eger went and he filled in the page from memory. And the guy went and checked it against another sefer Rashba, and he said it's exactly word for word. He didn't even every single letter was exactly the same as written. When you love something and you want something, you put in all that effort, and you don't forget. I once mentioned his name, and this is, to me, he was one of the Gedolim that lived after the Second World War, not as widely known as some of the other ones that we know of, but his name was Reb Sol Zebs Gustman. And I mentioned maybe once or twice as one story about him. He suffered greatly during the Second World War. Suffered greatly. After the war, he went and he made it through the war. He had a little son, Nebuchadnezzar, America, he used to call him. And he went and who was murdered by the Nazis. And by the Nazis threw him into a manure pile. And then they made him wash the clean up the manure pile with the son in there. So he took the son out of there and he washed him, of course, with love and care. And the son had a pair of shoes, on Nebuch, and he was so hungry they decided to take the shoes off and sell it for food, for bread. Could you imagine? So how he felt, his own sons. Meanwhile, he sold it, and he couldn't for the life of him use that money for food. And he went and he gave it to tzedakah for somebody who needed it for food. He said, I can't use my son's shoes, who was murdered by the Nazis, to buy a pair of shoes. So this is what he went through. 5 years he was hiding in the forests, and he learned what to eat. I think I once mentioned he took a walk once with Reb Chaim Oiseh, who was his Rebbe, who was the head of the Beis Din in Vilna, and he appointed him to be head of the Beis, part of the Beis Din in Vilna at 20 years old, which was incredible. A 20-year-old boy in Vilna. Vilna was a city full of Goyim, full of me, and Reb Chaim Oiseh felt that he was more of a Goyim than all these elderly people, and he put him on the board, so to speak, of the 3 Dayanim of Vilna. And this is Zev Gusman. That's his devotion to Torah by the time of the age of 20. And then he gets to Eretz Yisrael. He gets to Eretz Yisrael, and he decides to open a yeshiva. He opened the yeshiva in Beit Pagan. He passed away in the 70s, late 70s, if I remember correctly. And I have a friend actually that learned in that yeshiva, and the amount of Mesiras Nefesh he had to learning is so incredible. Now, there's I'll finish with this little story. He went, the yeshiva itself was next door to an old age home, an Eshel. And the yeshiva didn't have a kitchen. It was just a building with a base medrash. So they used the kitchen of this Eshel, of this nursing home, for the yeshiva. Now, this kitchen did not have the hechsher, so to speak, of the highest forms of hechsher that you would probably find. Everybody, there's always one higher hechsher than you. But he knew everything that went in and out of that kitchen, so he knew 100% of what was going in and out of this kitchen was good. And he was, so to speak, the mashgiach. He knew exactly what was going on in this kitchen. So he used this kitchen for his yeshiva. So meanwhile, you had these young guys who went over to him and said something to the effect of, listen, this Eshel doesn't have the proper hechsher. He says, I think it does. He says, listen, we are in Yerushalayim, in Beit Pagan, we are people know we have a vart, so to speak, we have power. He says, if you change the hechsher to the most proper hechsher, maybe they will move the people and every hechsher is a group of people all making money obviously on it. And of course, it could be part of it is altruistic to make sure you're eating kosher, but it is a money making project. And he says if you put in, because to show that somebody from Rav Gusman's yeshiva, Rav Gusman himself, is eating from a different hechsher, actually lowers the value of that other hechsher. So he says if we'll put you on the board. We'll put you on the board. He says, but if you don't do this, he says, then we're gonna put out flyers saying that you're eating from a hechsher that's not good. Rav Gusman stood up and looked at these younger fellas, and he said, let me tell you something. You're giving me a threat. Either you'll give me covered, or you'll give me charpa and busha. You'll embarrass me. He said, let me tell you something. I was a dying in Vilna at the age of 20. He says there are not too many people that could ever say something like that, even at the age of 75. I had covered, if I wanted it, at the age of 20. That was unparalleled in Vilna. I walked down the street and people would point and said, this is the dying in Vilna, and he's only 20 years old. He said, and then the war hit, and I had such busha. I had to wash my son from manure and watch how Nazis went. They threw babies in the air and shot them in the air for sport. He says, I suffered. I went through years of suffering during the war. He says, I had as much busha as a person. There's nothing you can ever give me, whether it's covered or busha, that will top what I've gone through. He says, so you don't threaten me with anything. He says, but let me tell you one thing. He points to his stender, and he says, for 5 years during the war, I didn't have a sefer. He said, I don't have time even to talk to you right now. I have a job to do. My job is to learn and to teach. And he walks the stender and sits down. That's somebody who's so devoted to Torah, the Yerushalayim that he had, and not being swayed by covered and threats, of course, of chappers and ambitions, being afraid of the mob, so to speak. And he went through life and up into Shemayim and there was in fact, I'll finish with one other story about him. Somehow I got very attracted to his history that I constantly maybe refer to it, but I read it back. He once went to be Menachem Mumble somebody. I may have said it to you, and the person started to cry, and he said, "Let me tell you, I am jealous of you." He says, "I'm jealous of you." He says, "You lost a son." He also said, "This person had lost a son." He said, "I'm jealous of his son. He lost a son in the war, in a war in Eretz Yisrael, in one of the wars." And he says, "You lost your son, Al Kiddush Hashem," he says, and he's going straight to Shemaim, because even somebody who is not holding Torah mitzvahs, but if he gets killed protecting Klal Yisrael, he goes straight to Shemaim. That's a proof. Even the Gedolim who don't hold, so to speak, of the army, all agree that when somebody Chas v'Shalom gets killed protecting Klal Yisrael, they go straight to Shemaim, to Gan Eden. It goes a special path. He says, "Your son got that path," he said. But not only that, he says, when he passed away, and you're able and you buried him, he said, "I don't even know where my Meirka is buried," he said. "I went through hell for 5 years. I lost my son," and he tells him the story. And then he says, "I don't even know where he's buried. But," he says, "you have it." And a day or two later, he called him up, this fella, and he said, "You're the only one that was menachem me after I lost my child." So these were the Gedolim. The Elazar ben Horkin, as I'm going to finish with this, was such a devotee to learning Torah. He gave up all his wealth, and his father wanted to throw it at him later, was going to give it to him. And at the end of the day, he said, "No, I'm so in love, so to speak, with Torah, that I would rather not have any wealth, just sit and learn Torah." And with that, I'm going to finish. And we should have a refuah shlema, as I said before, to Nalea Basara, and somebody, Sarah Bantima, somebody that I've heard about this morning, that's going to also attest today, and Shmuel ben Yeshaya, Shmuel ben Rachel. Thank you very much. Have a good Shabbos. It's Shabbos Parshas Chukas and Balak. There's 2 parshas. It's actually an interesting parsha. I'm sorry I didn't speak a little bit about it, but we should all have a very good Shabbos, and maybe next week. Thank you very much.